This episode is sponsored by PAX, the gold standard in emergency response bags. So when you're working under pressure, you need kit to be both dependable, tough and intuitive, and that's exactly what you get with PAX. Every bag is handcrafted by expert tailors who understand the demands of personal care, from the high-tech, skin-friendly and environmentally responsible materials to the cutting-edge welding process that reduces seams and makes cleaning easier. PAX absolutely puts performance first. They've partnered with 3M to make perfect reflective surfaces for better visibility, and bright grey interior makes finding kit effortless and fast even in low light. With over 200 designs, PAX bags are made to suit your role, your needs and your environment. And thanks to their modular system, many bags work seamlessly together no matter the setup. PAX doesn't chase trends, their designs stay consistent, so once you know one, you know them all. And if your bag ever takes a beating, their in-house repair team will bring it back to life. PAX are built to perform, made to last. Learn more at pax.bags.com or head to the show notes for further details.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're looking at decision-making within HEMS from an aviation and medical perspective with Adele Dobler. So few environments demand more precision and indeed timely judgments than within a HEMS system. So decisions are made rapidly, often with incomplete information in dynamic, unforgiving environments. So it is really an operational space where clinical urgency intersects with aviation risk, and where intervention requires a careful balance between decisive action and the principle of doing no harm. So today's guest, Adele Dobler, really works at this exact interface. She is a pilot with London's Air Ambulance with thousands of flight hours spanning urban HEMS, and also remote medical evacuation, but also high-risk environments from central London to deserts to high-altitude regions in both Kenya and indeed Canada. She brings exceptional depth of experience. So in this episode, we're really going to examine the realities of decision-making in HEMS, including cognitive load, inherent bias, operational trade-offs, and the critical inflection points that shape outcomes. And we're going to also look at dynamic decision-making, risk management, and professional accountability in environments where decisions must be made really in real time with minimal scope for error. Welcome to the podcast, Adele.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you with us, actually. I guess just as a framer and a starter, Adele, could I get you to maybe unpack for us fundamental decision-making under pressure? Could you, incomplete information, there is a time pressure. Could I get you to maybe speak to, what good enough looks like within decision-making?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And like you said, it is a pretty big question, so I'll obviously do my best to answer it. But I will preface it with, I always just try to do my best. I will still make mistakes. I will still have errors. So, there's no like perfect way to make these decisions, and I'm not a perfect person by any means. So we genuinely just try our best with the circumstances we have. But like you said, all of the decisions we make, it's very rare that you do have a complete picture of if A happens, then you get B, and then you do C. That's not really the scenario. Usually you have so many different variables, different moving parts, the human factors element, all of these things that you have to kind of put together. And, people do use frameworks for decision making. It's like DODA or SPAR, all these different things. But essentially, it's not necessarily the framework, but I think for me, it's more of the feedback loop. So once you've made a decision, what have I learned? What's the outcome? And am I going to continue on this path? So if we choose A, are we, we hit a crossroads and then we have another A and B. It's like, okay, do we stay with A, or maybe A is not working as well? Let's go B. It's like, okay, we need to go B. So now you're at B. Now you have B and C. Do we stay on B? Do we go to C? So unfortunately, it's not as simple as I know how to make good decisions now because I've been doing it for a long time. I think it's more of I've been doing this for a while, so I can zoom out a bit. I can see a bit more of the bigger picture, and I'm happy with changing the plan. So you just get more and more comfortable with either, confirming what you're already doing or changing your mind and doing something different. So I feel like that's sort of the best way I can sum it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you've flown a number of mission profiles within the HEM space. You've flown both in Vancouver and British Columbia. You've flown in London. You've flown in Kenya, all maybe quite different mission profiles. But could I get you to maybe walk us through And indeed, listeners through, if you would, Adele, look, in a way, a mission which has really tested your decision making and human factors training because they are such different environments.
Yeah, I don't know, there's a few that I was thinking of, but one that kind of stuck out for me and one that I'll remember for a while was pretty early on in my tenure in Kenya. And we ended up getting dispatched to somebody who'd fallen off a cliff. So it's at night in the middle of the desert. People think desert, just like some parts of it are very flat and just dusty, but the desert in Kenya is very mountainous as well. So you have these big ridge lines. Still, somehow there's dust on the rocks. It's all of these kind of moving factors. And the light levels there at night are very, very low. So we had to figure out how we were going to get as close as we could to this person who's fallen off a cliff. It was along kind of a really raggedy ridge line. Where are we going to park, essentially? How are we going to get the team to that person? How are we going to extract them? How are we going to get them safely into the aircraft? And then how are we going to get them to the care that they need, which is a few hours away in Nairobi? So, there's a number of compounding factors. Fortunately, as the team, when we're there, everybody's very experienced. We're flying, military MERT personnel who are very capable at the treatment side. So they can go into it feeling very confident of once we get the person out, we can stabilize them. We can make sure that they stay safe. Any sort of neck back injuries, make sure we manage that to the best of our ability. As far as the flying side of it, I was newer to the profile, but fortunately in Canada, we have a lot of mountains as well. So you kind of just build on your experience, build on your background, vocalize your experience, vocalize your, concerns. And as long as you can kind of have those open conversations, you're able to bring everybody's opinions in, bring everybody's perspectives in, and try and bring this together to the best of your ability. So we ended up selecting, luckily there was a nice little plateau that was quite close to the ridge. So we're able to essentially do our recce, come in and land. It was actually a really good spot. There wasn't very much dust, fortunately, because it was quite just rock on the top. So landed there, we're able to get the team out, waited for a few hours. In Kenya, it's interesting though, because while you're waiting, you start to hear the sounds. So you're like, okay, there are lions in the distance. We can hear the hyena. If we have a mechanical problem, what are we going to, there's a number of compounding factors. So that one definitely stood out to me. Fortunately, the aircraft was behaving, but we always have to have that backup plan. And yeah, it'll definitely stay with me. So we're able to extract the patient. They did end up having a few fractures in their neck, moved them to Nairobi, and then they actually ended up being medevac back to the UK. So it was a positive outcome. Everybody worked together, and yeah, will definitely stay with me for a while.
Yeah, I can imagine very different profile for sure. So could you maybe walk us through the cognitive load element of the variety of missions? Because true to say, it's maybe a very different cognitive load in a heavily urbanized setting where, flight times might be 5 minutes, might be 10 minutes. Then you're looking at British Columbia where it could be an hour, 2 hours, mountainous, like you say, dynamic day, night, very much cold weather, and then high altitude within Kenya. So, but maybe just walk us through how you manage, the various cognitive load elements that these profiles throw at you.
Yeah, definitely. You summed it up quite well. So London, our average flight time is about 7 minutes. So they're short, sharp, and the biggest load there is task saturation, like you said. So you're constantly being distracted, you're constantly being interrupted, and lots of paperwork that has to be done after every flight. All these things that we try and build in as much time as we can for them, but you do have to prioritize. It's like, okay, what is the big picture? What's our task at hand? What needs to be done right now? What can wait? So there's a lot of that kind of prioritizing of the job. Kenya is really high consequence. So if you are out in these remote areas, it's incredibly isolating. It's incredibly remote. There are bandits, there's wild animals, the dust. We're doing these night vision goggle landings with essentially no visibility. And the military is really good at setting up some lights on the ground for us, but you rely on those lights very heavily, which we can talk about a little bit later. And again, if you break down somewhere, how are you going to get a repair? How are you going to fix the aircraft? We're fueling out of drums. What's the quality of that fuel? So there's really high stakes things at play. And again, being able to prioritize. It's funny because you look at London and you think it's riskier. It is challenging and it is difficult, and there are inherent risks involved, but it is also quite developed. So we're close to either, Airbus can come and assist us with the aircraft. We have the team around us that can, we can get them picked up by a car quite quickly. So there's certain background elements that you have that support. Where you think of Kenya, it was quite cool, but it does feel a little bit more isolating and a little bit higher stakes because the consequences can be quite high and it can be hours before somebody can come help you. So just slightly different that way. With all of them, though, one thing I try to focus on, and as I've gained more and more experience, you're able to zoom out a little bit and just think more the big picture and never let that task saturation, whatever you're doing, pull you into a single problem. And then you get like your focus just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, where you really need to, if you catch yourself doing that, to be aware of it is often the hardest thing to say, okay, wait, I'm getting a bit, you can start like the wheels spinning a little bit too quickly, where it's like, okay, let's just slow down. Let's just pause. Let's just sit back. And that way it lets you kind of zoom out, take a beat, and then things actually go faster. It's funny, that whole like slow is fast mentality, where when you start rushing, of course, that's when you make mistakes, you do things you shouldn't have done, and you kind of lose that connection with the people you're beside because you're just steaming past them.
So just looking at some of the cognitive biases, Adele, could I get you to speak to really within decision making? Could I get you to speak to how you maybe guard against those cognitive biases? Because I'm sure they exist across domains from aviation and indeed medicine. And HEMS is really a place where aviation and medicine intersect. But could I get you to speak to really how you guard against cognitive bias?
Yeah, definitely. Cognitive biases will always exist, and I don't think the goal is to eliminate it, but like you said, at least to be aware of it, because it's hard to sometimes see yourself in that moment. It's like we're our own worst enemy when you're tired, especially teams that are high performing, want to do well by the patient. It's really easy to be like, oh, I'm tired, but I'll just push another hour. Oh, I'll just go another hour. And recognizing that tiredness in yourself is really difficult. But one of the ones that can definitely come in HEMS is that speed pressure bias, where you're like, oh, we just have to do it fast. So let's just do, and you don't really take that extra second to come up with a full plan. You're like, well, we'll deal with that later. It's like, okay, sometimes that is acceptable if they're low consequence decisions. With higher consequence decisions, often just taking that extra 10 seconds will save you hours potentially later in your life or something catastrophic. One of the other ones that I find creeps in every once in a while is familiarity bias. So something like, oh, I've landed in that site before. Great. Is it exactly the same as the last time you landed there? London in particular is really good for that. Oh, we've been to that park. We know, oh, you can kind of just picture exactly what it was the last time you were there. But has there been construction? Are there cranes? The people factor in London is a constant variable because, in the summertime, all the sunbathers are out and they have their blankets and they're having picnics and kids and everybody wants to film themselves with the helicopter. Like that is a variable that is always changing. So no matter how many times you've landed in that park, it will never be the same. So you have to really make sure that you're staying on top of the complacency that comes with that familiarity where, oh, I've been there before, we'll just go straight in. It's like, it might be worth just that one extra recce because otherwise you're going to go straight in, somebody's there and you're going to have to overshoot. And now you've wasted another 30 seconds, a minute having to go around to do another recce anyway that you could have just done the first time. So again, it's sort of balancing that risk reward that you may or may not achieve, where it feels really good when you can just do something snappy, but it might not actually play out the way you expected it to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Just looking at the managing risk, actually, Adele, because there is, in a way, I guess, a risk trade-off within HEMS, and safety first. And it's a fundamental element of London's air ambulance and other HEMS operations. But could I get you to speak to, that risk dynamic? You said it before, verbalizing, standing back, verbalizing risks, so that there's shared awareness, shared mental models. But could I get you to maybe unpack for us, weighing that crew safety against the perceived patient benefit when margins are tight, when it's critical care patient, when they might be really sick, but absolutely, that kind of safety first element and articulating that to the team.
Yeah, it is something we have to learn to balance fundamentally as a HEMS pilot because it's not worth risking 3 or 4 more lives for the sake of saving one. And I don't want to come across as sounding heartless either, because obviously we want to be there for people on the worst day of their lives and we want to be by their bedside. And these decisions never happen easily, and it's never for lack of caring, but you have to get to a stage where you can remove the emotion out of it, because a feeling is not a way to make a decision. And you know, I hate to use the word hero, but a lot of people look outside of the HEMS industry at HEMS pilots and paramedics, and don't get me wrong, what the doctors and paramedics are doing is heroic. But to put that stigma of like, we'll save the patient at any cost, and we'll steam through this, and we'll break weather limits, and we'll, oh, that something's wrong on the helicopter, oh, it'll be fine, we'll just go anyway. You can't get sucked into that hero trap where you're just dispatching because you feel like that's what you have to do. Um, it would be really quite devastating, in my opinion. And I would feel probably, I don't like to use the word failure, but I think I would fail my team if I let myself go down that road, make a decision to push weather, or dispatch with an aircraft that's not fully safe. And then you end up having consequences later because you made that early decision of like, we have to do it anyway. I think it'd be a big disappointment to myself. The margins do often present themselves as quite thin, but at least if you kind of know your thresholds, you know what's safe, and you don't push those thresholds more and more and more and more, you kind of get led down that garden path. That's where it starts to become very unsafe. And I'd like to think, in my experience anyway, most of the companies I've worked for, that culture is fostered, and it's not the push on itis, get there at all costs, and just make the job happen. We want to be there. We want to be by the patient side to the best of our ability. But at the same time, crew safety is paramount, and it's non-negotiable, and a crashed helicopter doesn't save anybody. So it makes it quite simple. Like, no can be a complete sentence at that stage. No, unfortunately, we can't do it. It's not safe.
Yeah. Well, could I get you to maybe just push on that? Because, paramedics and or flight paramedics or doctors or nurses listening to this that maybe do work in an urban environment, maybe don't appreciate the pressure actually of flying in a rural environment, a high mountainous rural environment like Canada, or indeed like Canada or like Kenya, whereby there's dynamic weather. It might not be where you are, but there's dynamic weather en route. And you're right in that you need to have a healthy safety margin. And we interviewed a fantastic guest recently who said, the worst pressure to fly, but no is a complete sentence, as you were saying, she's had to say no a few times. Could I get you to speak to maybe those decision making challenges when it's not just a 5-minute flight? It might be an hour, it might be 2 hours with various dynamic weather en route.
Yep, they are compounding problems. And it's funny because London is a very privileged city, I would say, especially some of the places I've flown. The fact that London has 4 major trauma centers within driving distance completely changes the mission. So that's where we can focus on getting that care to the patient side as fast as possible. And then we'll tend to transport them by road to the nearest hospital. It's funny though, because we keep the aircraft away from the Royal London Hospital during the day. We keep it at RF Northoltz, and the weather between those two, even though they're essentially 15 miles apart, can be quite different. So it can be sunny and blue on the rooftop of the Royal London Hospital while it's completely fogged in at Northoltz. So it is quite devastating to say we're not coming. They're like, it was fine outside. And I can 100% sympathize that, because you're like seeing something with your eyes and then you're being told it's different. Like, I get it 100%. But like you said, at the same time, we can't push the weather and then end up not even making it to the Royal London in the first place. One of the bigger ones I had in Kenya that was a really difficult decision and quite interesting was a job we had. The profile in Kenya is quite different. So when the military exercises are on, we're providing med cover for the British Army. And we have a base that's in Nanyuki. It's a few hours north of Nairobi. But then when the exercise is on, there's another base, a forward operating base, that's another few hours north in the actual desert, where it's really dusty, up to 40 degrees, quite flat. But then in between, there's all these hills and mountains. And then it rises up to about 6,000 feet in Nanyuki. Mount Kenya is right beside us. That goes up to 17,000 feet. So some of the density altitudes and stuff we're working with, the helicopter thinks it's at about 9,000 feet. So we're always toying between performance margins, low light situations, lots of dust, and you kind of have these compounding factors. We had one mission where we departed from the northern base to pick up a patient and a doctor from sort of an adjacent area, and then we're flying south to the middle base and then Yuki, and we would do something called a cross deck. So because the distances were so great, we would try and keep the operational aircraft available as often as possible. So we'd actually move the patient from one helicopter into another one, and then that helicopter would dispatch to Nairobi. We would go back north to provide cover. As we were heading back north, we end up getting these radio messages that, oh, there's weather coming in, there's a bit of a dust storm. None of this was forecast, of course, because there's no weather reporting in the middle of nowhere. And we're like, oh, a bit of dust, like that's fine. We fly in dust all the time. So we keep kind of chugging along. And then I've never seen a haboob before or experienced a haboob. So it's essentially a dust storm. So as a big front comes through, when the rain and the wind all starts building on the forward edge of that front, the rain like slams down into the dust and it just builds these massive plumes. And they are literally miles wide. I think they can be like 150 miles wide, up to sort of a mile almost. Like they're these massive, literally wall, just a bank of dust. And we're flying along and we kind of see the haze building, and then we see this wall that developed that literally went to a single point in the horizon. It's like, okay, well, can't go in it, can't go over it, you can't go through it. So what are we going to do? So we tried around one mountain ridge, thinking that, okay, maybe we can just sneak in and get to our base. No, we were probably 5 minutes away from landing, but it's like, well, we can't get around this way. So we're like, okay, maybe if we, if we're able to sneak around the other side of this mountain, we can come in from the other side if that hasn't been overcome. Nope, the whole base has been overcome now. Like, okay, well, we know that there is a little dust strip that some of the paratroopers use for their practice, and they land their planes before they do their circuits. And it wasn't too far. So we're like, okay, it's a known spot. There's no services there, but we know there's a road. Okay, so at least if we can get there, we know there's a road. If we're stuck there for a while, at least we'll have access. So sure enough, we go down, we land, and within a minute or two, we end up being completely overcome with this wall that just came. And my naivety, for some reason, I thought a dust cloud would be dry, but it was actually wet mud that like clogs everything. And Kenya, love it to bits. It's so funny. Within probably a minute and a half of us landing, we're surrounded by herders. So all these like curious locals with their goats are just like standing there staring at us. Just, I don't know what they thought we were. Did we bring the rain? I'm not sure. And I was really fortunate because the pilot that I was with at the time, he was also civilian. There's only a couple of civilian pilots that were flying there. Most of them were ex-military. Not that that changes anything, but we were just having some good banter. And it was one of those moments where the crew resource management could have broken down instantly because we had to change our plan. And if you were holding on really tightly to that idea, people get really uncomfortable, and that's where conflict starts to arise. So it could have been, stressy, uncomfortable, frustrating, where we kind of made a joke out of it, and we're like, oh my God, can you even believe it? And it actually ended up being quite fun. So we were able to get a truck to come to us, bring the doctor and the paramedic back to the base. We ended up sleeping in the aircraft until about 3 a.m, and then we're able to fly it back. And we took turns just like supervising and making sure nobody took anything off the aircraft. So yeah, that was an interesting one. I'll try and keep it short.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
Yeah.
like you said, very dynamic decision making in the moment. Adele, could you maybe speak to and just really bring us through, night vision goggles and instrument flight rules capabilities? There'll be listeners to the podcast that maybe aren't familiar with NVG flying or indeed IFR or VFR. Could I get you to just maybe unpack it for us initially, and then how it also, expands your operational envelope, but also can introduce new decision traps.
Yeah, definitely. So they are both techniques that have completely expanded the envelope of when we can fly, where we can fly, and how we do it. So night vision goggles essentially are two tubes that go in front of your eyes. They're not like binoculars that go right against your eyes. So you actually sit them out about an inch or so from your eyes, and you are able to look through the goggles, and then you look down at the instruments. So you're not with the goggles the whole time. I feel like that's a common misconception. And what they do is they essentially absorb as many photons as they can from the environment. It goes across a very impressive plate of glass that has like these microscopic tubes of glass. So the photons end up hitting that, they get amplified, and then they get turned into electrons, which are then presented on tiny little like TV screens, essentially in front of your eyes. So you look up through these little tiny TV screens that look like toilet paper tubes, and then you look down at the environment, and then you look through them, and then you look down for your close vision. So some of the weird things they can introduce, it's not a 3D image. It literally is like a TV. So your brain can interpret that it's 3 dimensions, but it's actually a 2D thing. So getting scale and depth perception can be quite interesting. They're also really susceptible to the level of light in the atmosphere. So while you're flying around, if it's a big bright moon, you'll actually see shadows, which is really cool. So it almost looks like daytime. So you get the moon shadow, so you can see the shape of trees, you can see undulating terrain, all that kind of stuff. As it gets cloudy or as the moon phase changes and it's a new moon, it goes from something called green illume to red illume, which means there are no photons available for the goggles to absorb. So you'll get something called scintillation, where it almost looks like staticky on a TV screen. And the perception doesn't really match, it's just not getting enough information. So it can really glaze over. Instrument flying, just to change pace quickly, is essentially being able to fly in the cloud. So there's visual flight rules and there's instrument flight rules. If you're flying on visual rules, you have to be in sight of the surface, essentially at all times. If you lose that reference, it's really easy to lose control of the aircraft. And there's so many stories of people who accidentally flew into cloud and end up having a bad accident because you literally don't know what's up and down. So unless you're trained to look at the instruments in the aircraft and trust them, it has sort of the blue and the brown. Blue is sky, brown is ground, and you just have to make sure you keep it that way. But it's really easy to lose that orientation if you're not practiced using those skills, because your brain tells you different things and you have these illusions where you feel like you're falling out of the chair because your body thinks you're still turning, but you're actually level. So you have to learn to fight those. So again, they let a VFR pilot fly into circumstances that normally you'd never be allowed to fly into. So they do expand the envelope. But again, with that envelope, you're introducing more types of risk, different types of risk. Night vision goggles are great, but they can also not quite see through clouds. But if it's really hazy or a bit misty, you can kind of see through it at an angle when you're kind of at the oblique. But then when you're level in it, the world can disappear. So there's been a few accidents, even here in the UK, because they've lost references on night vision goggles. So you almost get led into it. Plus, operating at night just introduces a whole other sphere of issues, the shift times. So now you're introducing different types of fatigue, instrument flying. You're flying in inclement weather. So it could be windy, rainy. All of these things add to your tiredness during the day. So you have to be really conscious of your fatigue levels and your capability, especially of the person you're flying beside, because they might have a different type of experience. And if you're pushing and pushing and pushing into something, oh, I've done this 1,000 times. I know where we are. We're, 50 feet on MVGs in the mist. It's like, well, you might be comfortable doing that, but is everybody with you at the same time? So you really have to have that 4 to go, 1 to say no, or 5 to go, depending on your crew size, to say, okay, these are the risks that we're taking on. Is everybody comfortable here? Or are you kind of like steaming off on a path by yourself and you're not bringing the team with you? Yeah, it definitely introduces some margins for that kind of like group think also.
Yeah, indeed, absolutely, absolutely. Adele, you have flown, over 3,000 flight hours. You've been parts of teams in the Central African continent. You've been parts of teams in North America. You've been parts of high-performing teams, certainly within the UK context. Could I get you to maybe, from your mind and indeed from your experience, maybe walk us through what excellent decision making looks like versus maybe not maybe being so good?
Yeah, I'll do my best because, like I said, for me anyway, it's always changing and I'm always just trying to show up to be the best version of myself that day. And we do all have good days and bad days. And I would say sometimes I'm better at this than other days, maybe because I'm tired or I'm hangry and I need a sandwich or something. Like all of this stuff does play a factor. But I would say there's sort of two main things. One of them is taking as many perspectives in as possible from the beginning, but then also being flexible with that plan. It's really easy to become, especially I think as you get more and more experienced, it's really easy to become rigid in your thought and rigid in kind of your mental model. And because you've seen it before, it's easy to just go out there by yourself. So I think it's really good to be able to bring the team with you. You kind of keep that broad picture, you gather input as fast as you can from multiple sources and try and integrate it before deciding, and you don't rely on one person's view. So like you said, it is a team decision. And I think that's something that can be lost quite easily. And you almost get like a wall between, I mean, theoretically, there is an actual wall between the pilots and the medical crew, but I like to bring that wall down if you can, because for me, we're there for the medical team. And the medical team has information that maybe could be useful for us. There's times that there is a sterile cockpit rule, but I do like to bring everybody in to try and make these decisions, because especially if they've been in the environment and they've seen things that I haven't seen, I need to be open to, I don't know everything, and at least being aware of that either naivety or a difference of perspective. I think this is why it's really good to have a diverse background of people, whether it's gender, country, experience, all these different things. It's like, well, you learned something completely different. Otherwise, it's really easy to get a narrower and narrower worldview. And it turns almost into an echo chamber of like, well, this is what we've always done. So we just keep doing it. And you're like, okay, but did we ask why? And not that it means that it has to change, but at least you've said, oh, we do it like this because of this. Awesome. Now we know why we're doing it. We're not just following the path blindly. It's also easy to feel like if you have to change your plan, you've either failed or lost, but I don't see it that way at all. It's like, well, we just had to change the plan. We'll do something different now. Well, as long as you're not holding too tightly onto any one idea, we try and think of, what is right, not who is right. And it's really easy to wrap your identity in those decisions or in good decision. I'm a good decision maker. It's like, well, I try to make the best decisions I can with the information that I have at the moment that is presented, and I will also change that plan if I need to, because if you hold on to it for the sake of, oh, but I had to be right, like, well, that doesn't really help anybody, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Could you just go deeper maybe on that psychological safety piece where you are, as you were saying, giving people permission to speak into your practice, into your aviation skills, but also into your mental models and into your vigilance? Because to your point, there's things that even the best practitioners, pilots will miss. And it's giving people permission to sort of speak into that. But it is fostering to your point, that psychological safety.
Yeah, I try and do my best anyway, because I would be really disappointed in myself if I found out later that somebody didn't speak up because they felt like they couldn't. Like that would absolutely break my heart. I do try, whether it's, the first time I fly with somebody different or the first time I'm doing a safety brief for a new medical crew, I will always try to make a point to just say, if you see anything weird with me, it is an open cockpit. There are, like we said, there's sterile moments or sterile cockpit moments where you're taking off and landing. Don't chat about what you had in your barbecue on the weekend. But if you see wires, if you see a bin bag that's flying up, if you see a person running at the aircraft, like I really truly hope that people feel empowered to speak when they're with me. And I will just do usually a quick, my name's Adele, I've been doing da da da, and we'll do a safety brief, we'll have a little chat. And as a wrap up, or kind of like a debrief point of that introduction almost, is to just say, if you ever see anything weird, I'm still doing this. I'm learning here. We're doing things new. We're in this together. It's an open cockpit. We'll take everything as it comes today. And, we just want to get through it safely. And if we can have fun doing it, that's even better, just to kind of break the ice of that scenario first. So then hopefully, and hopefully I can lead by example as well, where, if I need to speak up, I will also speak up in a way that holds people in positive regard and is helpful, and not being critical for the sake of being critical, but to foster positive team environment where we can all learn what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And as you were saying before about, I really like the fact it's about what is right rather than who is right. And it's
Yeah.
not about scoring points on a board. A bit of a sort of retrospective question, Adele. With over 3,000 flying hours in multiple different missions, multiple countries, multiple contexts. What does the sort of the Adele of now look like in your decision making versus the Adele of when you were starting out as a HEMS pilot, or indeed in aviation? How has your decision making evolved, matured, developed over time?
Yeah, it definitely has been an evolution. We've been through a few things, well, past Adele and myself. I Yeah, I look back in fondness, but also I can see certain places where I think I was outsourcing my decision making a lot, where I was really wanting kind of that external input or external validation. And 100% that is important. And gaining perspectives is key. But the ultimate decision that I would make as either a captain or a co-pilot or just as a person, I would almost not deflect it, but I would kind of look to see what other pilots I was flying with were doing. So, whether I'm flying with them or just sharing an aircraft, working alongside them, when they would do something, I would kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily a conscious act at the time, but I would sort of say, like, oh, is that something that I would do or is that something I wouldn't do? So I feel like I almost have this little Rolodex in the back of my mind now of like, I would do this and I wouldn't do it like that. And if not for any reason of it's just a point of preference, or maybe I saw, okay, well, that's sort of like a complacent approach to do it. And I wouldn't necessarily do it like that if it was me. And I feel like I was able to kind of build just all of that experience from other people and take it on board as much as I could. I don't know if you guys know Chris Hadfield, I'm like a massive fangirl, but
Yeah, I do.
he's
He wrote that fantastic book. What was the book called again?
is it Astronaut's Guide to the Galaxy? Galaxy or
Yeah.
Universe? I've forgotten. I think it's Galaxy. And he's a Canadian astronaut, absolute legend, very cool mustache. And he has a really cool sort of summary in his book that I find myself always kind of reverting back to. So he talks about being a plus one, a zero, or a minus one in a team. And you can kind of extrapolate that to decision making as well, where, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to make this choice of, okay, am I going to sample the fuel today? And it's like, okay, if I sample the fuel today, is that something that a plus one pilot would do? If you don't sample the fuel today because you kind of don't feel like it, is that something that a minus one pilot would do? So a plus one essentially adding to the team. A zero pilot is just neutral. You're not really bringing anything or taking anything away. You're sort of just there. And a minus one, self-explanatory. You're like dragging everybody down with you almost. Not quite that dramatic. But I do try to almost have a scale of like, okay, I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Is this going to be a plus one? Is this going to be neutral? Is this going to be a minus one? So as I've been able to kind of form those ideas in my own mind, I feel like I've been able to rely on my own compass and I've been able to develop that compass. And when it swings a certain direction, I can just hear it a little bit better now, where, you always have this external noise and opinions and insecurities, seeking validation, people put all of these things that you have just as a person based on how you grew up. It's hard to listen to that internal compass. So I feel like at the beginning, I was able to kind of take all of the lessons I was able to learn, put them together. And now my compass, when it turns and it swings, anytime I ignore it, I always regret it. I'm like, oh, I had a feeling that it just wasn't, something wasn't right. Or I was getting pulled down a path that I was like, oh, I wasn't quite comfortable. And every time I've ignored that inner compass feeling, I've always been like, Dobler, like you should have listened to yourself. And yeah, it just is quite frustrating. So now I think because I have that internal compass that's been calibrated, so to speak, I'm able to zoom out a bit farther. So now I can like see the big picture, take in as many perspectives as I can, see what's helpful, what is, going to help us move forward, ignore a bit of the fluff that is either negative or critical for no reason, or just distractions, interruptions, all of that stuff. And once you're able to step back, you can kind of feel when you're getting caught up in it a little bit more and just be like, okay, we're just going to slow down for a second, or we're just going to take a beat and think about the consequences for a second. And then I'm able to form a bit better explanation of maybe why. Because just because I don't feel like it isn't always the best answer. But it's like, why do I feel weird about this? Be like, oh, the weather, it says maybe it's right on the limit and we're technically allowed to go, but I've seen what it looks like at that weather condition and I know it's not safe. It's that sort of thing where at least I've had the experience to know, okay, flying around, if we're allowed 800 meters visibility in UK HEMS, flying around London with cranes, it's not great, it's not safe. So is that something, that a risk you're willing to take now? Not necessarily.
But like you said, bringing to bear experience, bringing to bear your reflections, and it kind of tees me up nicely for the last question, which is bringing to bear lessons learned from debrief. And Adele, if I could get you to speak to maybe how you debrief.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a debrief is key. And even if it's not done necessarily in a formal setting, again, there's lots of frameworks you can follow, but essentially they'll follow a similar plan of what did we do, what did we learn, and what can we do differently. And even if you just do that quickly, so if sometimes we don't always have time to sit down, have a formal debrief, follow like a checklist going through it. But an example, something I try to do as often as possible is I know the medical crew are coming back from a difficult job, just to take that second while they're putting the bags back in the aircraft and just say like, are you guys okay? How's it? Do you need anything? Can I get anything set for you? And even just even just asking that question quickly, you can sort of see on people's faces when they're like, oh yeah, fine. You're like, you're not that fine. And you can kind of read between the lines of people either putting on a brave face or maybe they are just fine. And as you get to know people and fly with them a little bit more, you can see, oh, they're getting a little bit quiet. Like maybe we just need to try and stop for like a quick refuel of food. So, now we're going to be putting fuel in the aircraft. Can we get a Diet Coke? Can we get a drink? Can we get food? Just something to get some sugar in you, get some food in you, have just a beat to just decompress for a second, because it's really easy to just have that back to back to back to back, and you get caught up, and it almost like it turns into this metronome pace of you just go, you go, you go, and it's like, do we just need to interrupt that for a second and reset? So I think for me, making room for that debrief and making room to have a quick reset is really important. And again, in that moment, you can think, okay, well, what are we going to do going forward? The plan that we're following, is this a plan that we're going to keep following? Good outcome plus bad decision can be a false positive also, where you kind of get led down of like, oh, well, it worked, but we didn't really do it right, but then we're going to keep doing it. So in that debrief process, I think it's also very important to make sure that people come away from that debrief knowing that they can still do whatever they're doing, or know that they can still try, because sometimes the debrief can be critical is not the right word, but sometimes it can be delivered in a way, and everybody perceives things and everybody receives things differently, but they can be delivered as almost a personal attack sometimes. So if somebody really takes something to heart and then they start to get discouraged and then they start to lose the will to try, I feel like that can also spiral the other way, where to me, a debrief tool should be used to say, okay, what do we do well? What are things we can learn? And what are we going to do next time? Just keep it simple, almost snappy, without getting too like in the minutia of it, because everybody looks at things differently. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So yeah, just trying to keep that perspective.
Adele, listen, it's a pleasure to catch up with you. There was some real pearls of wisdom in this conversation, just from your received wisdom and experience over time, actually. And so I just want to thank you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
No, I'm genuinely just honored to be here, and thank you so much for the invite. It's been an absolute treat. It's nice to be able to share some of these ideas, because they do just become kind of day to day for us, and we don't take the time to think about it and reflect, or even reflect of where we come from. So yeah, it's just really nice to be here. Thank you.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.